Okay, and we're here live with another episode of the Kink Tank. And this episode, we're going to be talking about love's place in BDSM. It's getting close to Valentine's Day here, so we thought that this would be a good topic and something that I think folks involved in BDSM vary widely in their opinions of this topic. So I had some questions, and we'll just start with one of those and kind of get the ball rolling here. But the first question that I was hoping to tackle was whether love is an essential component of a fulfilling BDSM relationship. What do you guys think?
No.
Okay.
That's concise, Josie.
It's not.
I would have to disagree with you, Josie. I think I think there's different kinds. I think there's different kinds of love. I mean, that would be my approach to this topic. Is that for me, it doesn't have to be a romantic kind of love, but it has to be a kind of trust and intimacy that can only be a kind of love, I think. So if the question is for the best experiences, I would say yes. If it's necessary for any experience, no.
Right. That's pretty obvious in dungeons and stuff. I mean, people can do BDSM play without having love feelings and but we're talking about the relationship side, and I was trying to think of this myself, and my general way of doing things, I've never really entered into a BDSM relationship with someone that I didn't care for, that I didn't care about, and I realized that I was kind of substituting the word care for love. I have a pretty high bar for what I consider love, but I think that for me, anyways, it's not that I don't think that could work or it's doomed to fail, so I don't start it. It's just that my preferred method is to get involved with people that I do have love or romantic care feelings for. I'm not saying it can't work without it.
I think what often ends up happening is it turns into a love kind of a feeling. Even if it doesn't start in that territory, or that's not, the point of the relationship, a lot of times you are dealing with things that are intimate and things that are very revealing about yourself, so that relationship can kind of blossom into love, so it becomes a gray area. But I don't think that you have to. I think you can have a respect for someone and just have that as your foundation for your relationship and not have it grow into love. But it is a special kind of a feeling. I do agree with Aaron on that point.
Well, this also sort of touches on a topic that we had discussed a little bit even last night, just at one of our events of, what is love, and like what people call it, different things. People have different ideas of what it is. So I mean, we're shooting at a moving target here. I understand, because when you're talking about respect, some people might consider that a love feeling for someone. But I think, in the spirit of Valentine's Day, let's try and keep it in the in love realm for this. At least let's try and tackle it from that angle. So do you have to be in love with somebody to have a fulfilling BDSM relationship?
I agree with Josie, no.
Thanks. Well, no, I think we have to define that too, because if you're talking about pickup play at a party, I can trust you without loving you. That's pretty easy to do. Even a regular play partner, I can trust you not to be a murderer, but that doesn't mean that I love you. It just means we're playing together and we have a certain level of a relationship. But I guess my question would be, if we're talking about an established, I can even power exchange with someone who I don't love, but if we're going to talk about titles, we're going to talk about you are my dominant, I am your submissive, you are my slave, I am your master kind of language, I guess that's a different question. Is love necessary for that kind of established power exchange? I think the answers are probably different for most people. That love would be a pretty important component to that level of commitment.
I agree with Josie on that.
And I feel like Josie's right when she says that it may not start with that in mind. You know, you have a service or power exchange arrangement with somebody, but you know, how often can they come and do housework for you or cook for you or, you know, tend to the services without you having warm fuzzy feelings for that person, you know, without you having a certain amount of love for that person over a period of time. I don't think I could. I don't think I could have a power exchange or a service oriented relationship with somebody and that's what we agreed on and that's where we kept it, and not start feeling some kind of, I don't know about romantic love, but let's just say, you know, deep feelings of caring for the person. When
Appreciation.
Appreciation, sure.
Right,
Well,
but
and for some
the
people,
problem is that we're gonna end up filtering back and forth. You know, I mean, the problem is that I agree with everybody, right? I think everybody's right because, like you said, when shooting at a moving target, I don't think that this is an area where people's opinions are wrong. And so I agree that I could have somebody come over all the time to perform service or, you know, be in a service position or exchange things and have this sense of developing feelings. But if the target that we're going to use is our personal valuation of being in love with someone, I think I can love them in the same way that you would love a cousin or, you know what I mean, some other type of platonic sort of love that you have for people without being in love with them, right? And I don't know if that, I mean, maybe that's splitting hairs, but that was the hair that was split earlier. I mean, I've had lots of, you know, opportunities to play with people that I really, you know, have a great deal of affection for, you know, where I care about their well-being, where I will call them after we've done a scene or follow up with them, but I know I'm not in love with them. And I don't know that being in love with them would improve the play that I have with them because it's a hook on that style of play that usually just works really well and we have a good time with it. And I don't know that it needs some impetus for it to get better.
Do you think that, and I want to talk about that a little bit more, but you know, it occurs to me that love may actually be seen as an impediment to some kinds of
I was waiting for you to
BDSM
bring that
play.
up, actually. That's one of my favorite things to talk about is the fact that I have a much, much harder time, even if that's what's asked of me, of being hyper aggressive or, you know, hyper sadistic with people that I am in love with. My level of concern for their well-being sometimes outweighs even what I know they want. And even what I know with somebody that I care less about, that doesn't mean I don't care about them, just care, you know, love them as opposed to being in love with them. You know, I've laid some beatings on some people that I knew well from a play perspective that I was much more comfortable laying into than I do with partners sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes I feel that way. You know, if their thing, and not just hard play, you know, difficult physical play, but you know, emotional play, degradation, humiliation. I find that I have a much harder time doing something like that with someone that I have love feelings for. And even if that was like what pushed their buttons and drove them crazy and that's what they wanted all the time, I think the more that I loved that person, the less I would want to say those things. You know, to treat them in the way that their fantasy is in their minds.
So for you, the line is emotional sadism versus physical sadism?
No, I would have a hard time beating them to a pulp too. I'm just, you know, it does.
Do you think that you can administer emotional pain without beating someone to a pulp emotionally?
Of course.
Yes. Yes, I do. I absolutely do. Welcome to my wheelhouse. We'll talk later, but yes.
I'm just saying that either, you know, harsh physical play or sort of hot button emotional play gets harder the more I feel for somebody. And so in some cases, if that's, you know, if I start on, you know, embark on a relationship with somebody and that is their kink and that's what they want, and the less that I know, yeah, I can do that, that sounds like fun, we can both get something good out of this, and I can treat them a certain way, talk to them a certain way, you know, administer pain a certain way, the more I feel for them, I think the less, it might actually keep me from being able to give them what they want.
Do you think that's true even if that's what your dynamic's always been? If it started out that way and those feelings developed along the way, do you think that as it went and those feelings grew, you'd be less and less inclined to keep that dynamic up, even though it was that way to begin with?
Yeah, I think I would be less inclined.
Huh.
I have a bit of a different view because I tend to take a very pragmatic view to the emotions that go into a relationship. And one of the things that I have had the good fortune to discover over the course of my time being in the kinky community and being sort of more heavily involved in kinky relationships is that, play and power exchange tend to be a fairly substantial part of the relationship. And no matter how much affection or care I have for somebody, if I say, you know what, I like you too much to do this to you, it's pretty much the death knell for the relationship, because that's part of what makes the relationship. Like, I have found that the emotional side, the affection and the care within my relationships tends to suffer when the power exchange suffers. So I can't let the emotion get in the way of the power exchange, because then the emotion falls apart.
Well,
It makes us feel distant and disconnected.
I take that view, but I don't want to say that everything falls apart. But I do take the view that the emotion is important and makes the degradation, the debasement, richer, deeper. And I think that you get something extra connected out of it when there is something special.
For me,
I'm
I
married
wouldn't be
to
able to accept it unless I did care about that person and I knew they cared about me, so that there could be a balancing between adoration and degradation. I couldn't do that with somebody that just for dungeon play.
Well, and some people do just for dungeon play, and certainly I'm not above it. If you want me to call you names, I will. I like that, but it feels different when there's that actual connection. One of the things that I'm married to my primary submissive. One of the things that we, by and large, keep private is water sports. That's something that is very deep and emotional. Thing I'll share with anyone. So that is, I think, the opposite take from Mr. Michael, in that I feel like the love and the connection lets us push past some of those boundaries.
And I think it ends up being a personal thing. I don't disagree with you. Like I said, that's the problem with opinions sometimes in a matter like this is, I agree with a lot of that. I've been in some situations where the emotion made it easier to break through those barriers because I was more willing to engage somebody where I knew them well enough and knew that that's what they needed. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
So my affection for them made it easier to hurt them. But sometimes it's the opposite. Even for me, it depends on the circumstance.
Yeah, and I think part of that for me is, how much I feel like, if we're talking about really heavy pain, or we're talking about degradation or humiliation type of play, some of that I think has to do with how well they've convinced me that that is the hottest thing ever for them. Like you were saying, Shane, that when we have that connection and trust and the communication that's going, and I feel like this is something that they don't just want, they want from me. And when I've been convinced of that, then I think it does make it easier in that case.
I think you raise an interesting point. One of the issues that I came across as related to affection, or love, or whatever you want to call it, is I was with a partner who was absolutely, on their list of, hard limits was humiliation play, which is fine. I knew that going in, so it's something I never brought up. But being poly, it was something that I'd engaged in with other partners, so it wasn't like it was missing from my life, and there was no big need to push it into this relationship. But over time, this partner said, you know what, I think I'm actually developing an interest in this. I would like to engage in this with you. And that was really difficult for me because it went from a hard limit, an absolutely do not touch, to wanting to try it. And so the same thing, I had to really have a sense of confidence that this is what this person wanted. And so I made them reflect on it and actually write me an essay on why this was important for them to want to try, what they thought they were going to get out of it, why they wanted to engage in it with me, so that I had a sense of confidence going in that it wasn't something that I was sort of, putting my stamp on, making this happen as opposed to something that they genuinely wanted. But I don't know that we could have had that conversation if we didn't have a relationship where we could bring these things to people. This is something we've never done before, and now I'm interested in it. I'm lucky that I'm with people I can have good conversations with.
Well, I think that's part of it. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Any growing relationship, you're going to have changes like that, where, it might have been a hard limit, and it changes to a soft limit or something like that, and it's just a sign of relationship growth and
or changing
trust
interests.
building. Yeah, and changing interests.
I think one of
You
the
guys are
other
Kinkster too.
I think one of the other factors to all of this is how much the person that is giving the degradation is into actually giving the degradation. I mean, the more you're into it, wouldn't that make it easier to do?
Not necessarily. I can be into all kinds of crazy shit and try and convince or encourage or probe a partner into, but to Michael's point, I need to know they want it. It's I can find somebody just to call a bitch or a whore or a slut, but it feels better for me when they love when I do it, when they absolutely melt when that makes it.
So it seemed like maybe
Right, I'm always saying that
feel like you're fulfilling a need for someone else. That's kind of what I'm hearing a lot of you guys saying, is that when it feels like you're doing this thing for them that they want a lot or need, that it's a lot easier, regardless of whether you were uncomfortable to begin with.
Yeah, I suppose. And it also helps to be convinced that it, even though they're asking for it because that's what they want, it helps for me to be convinced that that's actually going to be good for them.
Right. And I would
different
like to,
things.
as the kids say, keep it real here for a moment. I want to do some real talk here because I think a part of it is, at least for me, and I've heard this from other people, whether they admit it or not, is you're asking me for something that I have a trepidation about because I know what the possible outcomes are. So I don't want you to hold me responsible for your breakdown. Are we cool? Is that okay? And if I have that, then I usually feel a whole lot better about it.
Right.
Well, and I think that
Well, we're talking about relationships, and one of my big things is I don't ever want to threaten my relationships with play. And if I'm going to say things to you that make you feel a certain way, I don't want you going, you made me feel this way, I can't ever talk to you again. Like, that's where my trade-off is I will never threaten a relationship with play.
If you care about that person.
Correct.
If you want to play with them again, if you're
Correct.
concerned about their well-being.
So I'm basically looking for a liability waiver.
But I'm looking
I
for
don't know
more
who
than
else
a
And that's what
I've
makes
heard
you
it. I've
not
heard it from
as
other
big
people.
of an asshole.
Yeah.
Well,
But
no,
I think
I'm looking for
I
more of a.
think that
Go ahead, Brian.
being connected, having that love connection, is what gives you that waiver, or helps it easier to give that waiver. I watched, and this is not an original thought, I got it directly from Shane. I went to see a presentation Shane did on Tuesday, and one of the things that really stuck out to me about this particular presentation was how he said, hey, you know what, things are going to go wrong here. And you've got to be connected and trusting with your partner enough that if you cross the line, things are going to be okay tomorrow. And I think that type of trust is only something you can develop when there really is love, when there really is connection there.
Good point.
Yeah, and I think too there's a difference between the love that you need and connection that you need. So I bottom for I like some edgier play. That's just what I'm into some of the time, and I don't think that I need love from my person that I'm doing that with, but I do need connection, and I think that can look different. Maybe that's cuddle kind of connection, maybe that's a sex kind of connection, maybe that's a love connection, but it doesn't have to be love all the time for me.
Let's move on to the next question, which I hadn't really thought of it this way, but does love need to go both ways? Okay, some of us are saying, love for them makes for deeper connection, better relationship, maybe not necessary for a variety of BDSM type relationships. But what, is it is it necessary when it's there that it goes both ways, or is it possible to have a fulfilling BDSM relationship where one person is in love and the other person is not?
Ooh, I don't think that's sustainable.
Yeah,
That's
that
rough.
seems.
I
Yeah.
think it is.
Non-committed love. Many a poem written about that.
I think
It's
so long as the
quixotic
boundaries are
love.
clearly
No.
defined up front.
Okay.
I think that sounds like a abuse submissive situation to me.
Well, I don't know. I mean, yeah, it can be manipulated in that way to, but I'm talking about um, basically a negotiated, well communicated. I know you're in love with me, but I'm not in love with you, and I get good things from our relationship, and you get good things from our relationship. Uh, and so can't that
Eventually,
just be
it
good?
sounds like somebody would fall out of love, or somebody would have to fall in love. I mean, that doesn't seem like a
Right.
situation that would remain static.
I mean,
That
unless the
seems.
person that's in love is a super masochist and doesn't care, then sure.
Well, that sounds funny, Marissa, but I was thinking, what if that's kind of their kink?
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean,
That
I think it's
that is the
probably
ultimate
okay for a
form
little while
of
until it turns into resentment. I've never heard of it
Yeah.
not turning into that.
But I mean, isn't that really the ultimate form of true sacrifice and true devotion and true loyalty? And then you throw a little masochism in there, and um, I mean, that sounds like a recipe for some good kink for some people.
For
And
sure.
if it's negotiated, then they would both be. If it's not negotiated, then that does sound like a recipe for disaster. But what Michael's saying, if they both sit down, they both say, okay, this is where I stand, this is where you stand, we want to continue this, and the answer is yes on both parts, then why not?
I'm calling bullshit on that person. I think that person
Right.
no, baby.
Yeah.
Seems like
You
wishful
don't love me
thinking.
back. It's fine. I don't need you to love me back until 6 months later when they hate you for not loving them back. That person is putting all their money on the bet that you will eventually fall in love with them. No doubt in my mind.
Right. I agree
Okay,
with
Josie,
you.
I buy that. I do believe that, Josie, but I also think that that is a relationship that some people will willingly engage in, and whether it's for 2 months or 6 months or a year.
Just because you can engage in a relationship doesn't mean that you should or that it's healthy.
Okay,
But
but
I don't even care if you want to engage in that. I'm just saying it's not sustainable. You can probably do it for a little while, but not a long time.
okay,
What's
but
sustainable? You know,
I do want to talk about sustainable because I mean I didn't want to ask questions about sustainable is love necessary for a sustainable relationship, because I don't consider it to be sustainable or the length of time to be the measure of how fulfilling or how good a relationship can be for someone.
true.
So if it were to last for 2 months and it was great for that 2 months, and maybe it isn't sustainable when love goes one way, does that still make it wrong or bad or not worth getting into?
No, well, I mean, that's kind of like the thing we were talking about the last time, is that it's just well, a lot of people don't break up; they just renegotiate their terms, right? And as their relationship evolves in or out of love, they renegotiate terms. That's what that sounds like to me.
Mhm.
Well, it depends on what your goals for the relationship are. Like, the scenario Michael said, where they both negotiate and they're both getting something out of the relationship, then that's what the goal of the relationship is, not necessarily love. Regardless of the fact that one person is in love with the other one, love is not the central goal of the relationship. It's the BDSM activities that they're sharing. So, depending on whatever you're wanting to get out of that relationship is going to be what matters in the long run.
Well, but you need some room to grow with that if things change for the people that are involved, because this ties in sort of to the next question, and a really good question that was submitted to us. These two kind of go hand in hand. The chemicals and hormones released by the body during intense situations, especially sexual ones, encourage bonding, and can mimic romantic love. How do you keep that in perspective and not let it affect the play or the everyday interactions? And this ties in pretty closely with my next question, which was, can BDSM strengthen love in relationships? And so,
I don't know if it
Marissa,
can strengthen love, but it can strengthen closeness.
but Marissa, to your comment, you were saying, hey, if we all agree that this is just kink and whatever, and that's cool. Sometimes what happens is when you put two people in these intense situations in the pressure cooker of sexually charged BDSM, they may either fall in love and that changes the dynamics of their relationships, or they may feel like they're falling in love because they're confusing the bonding that happens during these situations under duress with being in love with someone.
Yeah, no, I totally get that and agree with it. And I was going to say this
I'm sorry.
earlier. Sorry. I was going to say this earlier. I think part of the issue that we have when we have discussions about love and its role in relationships is that our language really fails us when we talk about love, because we have one word to describe multiple levels and multiple situations of love, whereas other languages have multiple words to describe that, and we have one. So it's sort of, yeah, I get that what you're saying, it can mimic love, but it wouldn't really be love, and in any other language I could use different words, but I can't.
Sure. Other languages have different words for parental love, for brotherly love, for, and we have love. And I understand that's an obstacle. It's like switch, what does that tell us about a person? Not a whole lot. But we've got 7 different words for dominant.
Right.
Erin, you were going to interject something in there?
Yeah, they were talking about the brain chemicals that happen when you're in love, the dopamine and all that kind of stuff. You get those same chemicals when you eat chocolate,
Yes, I do.
Somehow I don't.
Well, that explains why girls like chocolate better than they like me.
Sometimes, somehow I don't confuse my feelings that I get when I eat chocolate with the feelings that I have when I know that I'm in romantic love with somebody. I think that even though the feelings are intense when we play, that they're distinguishable.
Right, except that chocolate has never asked me for aftercare.
So we're back to that, aren't we?
Well, no, but the point I'm trying to make, though, is that I understand what you're saying, but we're dealing with a two-way relationship. There's all kinds of inanimate objects that I love that give me love feelings for whatever, but I don't have to deal with the dynamic that exists dealing with another person.
I don't know. I kind of feel like if you're in a scene or a session and those feelings, that dopamine kicks in, the adrenaline, the endorphins, and you get it all confused, fuck it. Awesome. Play with that, right?
Well,
Give them
I
chocolate.
That's why you eat chocolate, right?
I'm uncomfortable saying that that's not.
I like that theory.
But just because it came from an intense situation doesn't mean that you don't actually love that person. I don't like that. I think that it certainly can, real love can come from that. But it's a little bit like, maybe you should sleep on it. Maybe the 3 seconds after you've had this amazing feeling, maybe that's not the best time to be like, oh man, I love you. Maybe it is.
Let's get married.
Right, but maybe you should take a minute.
Well, no, that's a little far.
It's
That's
like
not what I'm suggesting.
telling someone.
I'm not suggesting scenes at the altar.
All the guys in
but
here just had a heart attack collectively.
Right.
Well, I think there's something to this for sure. That I am careful with somebody that I don't know very well, who says, "I would like you to play with me because, I like what I know about you. Other people seem to trust you. You're a good, I would like you to be the one to." Initiate me into this, or to have my first scene, whatever. It's kind of like taking someone's virginity in a way that, there's like, oh wait, you're a virgin? Oh, there's extra caution here, because there seems to be something that happens with the bonding in these situations that I worry that, not that they won't have a great time, or that I won't have a great time. It's just that what happens in the aftermath? Is it going to be, are they going to be sort of attached to me in a way now that they wouldn't have otherwise been? And I think often the answer is yes, and I have to be careful of that. Everybody should be careful of that.
I think that's a very valid point, and that's a very fair point, but I also think you threw in the other factor of them being new.
Yeah, and because it would be like a first time playing, but I think the original question was not necessarily new people, just people that engage in these activities together may bond in a way that mimics love or looks like love, but isn't necessarily love, and especially when the two people aren't on the same page. Because when you're in this scene, it feels deep and hot and romantic.
Right.
I'd like to take that step back, though, and just, you just said, if we're directing this towards people who are going to be newish, I think one of the things, what I'm hearing out of this is we're getting close to the end of the time, is it's okay to be in love. Some people have had great results with that and had better interactions. It's okay to play and not be in love, or to have something on that spectrum. But I think the other thing that we're learning is, especially if you're new, you need to be aware that you're going to be dealing with some stuff that can be emotionally intense, and to be judicious about how to interpret those feelings, right? And it gets us back to don't rush into things. But I think if we're looking for, if we were to have a discussion with people who are new, I think what we're getting across from an entire panel here, which is a great thing to have, a huge group of people, comparatively speaking, is that you can have great scenes with people you love. You can have great scenes with people you don't love. You can have kinky relationships in some cases that are long term, without having, without being in love with those people. But just to be cautious in terms of interpreting your feelings. Know yourself.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So the original question was, how do you keep it in perspective? I think the best possible way to keep it in perspective is to be self-aware. To be aware of what you're engaging in. If you only have the love feels after that person is, smacking you around for a little while, maybe you should check yourself before you start writing their name on your binder. I
Go
think
out for
that's
coffee once.
well, and
Or practicing your signature with their name.
right,
Yeah.
but that's not a new person problem. We need to acknowledge that too. This
Yeah.
happens to experienced people too all the time. That's not a rookie mistake.
Right. And
I remember being some experienced guy's fangirl when I was a newbie. I remember being like that. But yeah.
Yeah, and the person who originally asked that question about bonding and chemicals, sort of clarifying here that mimic is not to say fake. Oxytocin, for instance, promotes real bonding, especially with repeated exposure. So I think what they were getting at was that it's not necessarily false bonding, but you can actually, it's kind of like those weekend retreats, those corporate weekend retreats where they do all these trust exercises and everybody like sits in a circle naked and or whatever. Like it's all this sort of creating tribe, it's a common experience, and that common experience, whether it's making yourself emotionally vulnerable, which we often do in BDSM scenes and relationships, sort of bearing our kink and our interests, trusting people in that way, that it promotes bonding in a way, where other people who shared experiences sometimes do. Ask guys who've been in wars together. Ask guys who've, even taking somebody on a first date, to the amusement park and all the roller coaster rides and all the dangerous things that you do. It releases chemicals in your brain that associate with bonding and perhaps love. And I think BDSM is very much along the lines of those kinds of activities. Not necessarily war, but that's kind of a really extreme example. But sure, a roller coaster ride, absolutely.
Can't be roller coaster ride.
Roller coaster while eating chocolate.
We had another comment come in. Says, I'm in a committed relationship. Over time, it has changed. Over the course of the 2.5 years we've been together, we have renegotiated aspects of our play. things that were once hard limits have now become soft limits, due in part to increased trust. There's not really a question in there, but I think it's a a valuable statement in there that I think, if Shane, if you're looking for truths or things that we can glean from the conversations that we've had thus far, is that you have to leave room for some change, first of all.
Yeah,
whether it's
I think it's just
feelings,
human nature.
that getting into a relationship saying, this is going to be a master and servant relationship, you must adore me and pray to me at night and whatever, and I'm going to disregard you like you're not even there. That sounds great and hot and everything for a little while, but I think you have to allow for some flex in that. You have to allow for your feelings to change if they do, for their feelings to say, this isn't working out for me anymore. What I need is for you to love me back, or I just think that going in, and there's a value in negotiating what your relationship is going to be, but I find that it is hard to negotiate what your relationship is always going to be. I don't see that resulting in much success most of the time.
Well, but success, I mean, that's the problem. It's interesting because I've gone to a few classes where they were saying that, we talk about these things like successful relationships, right? I'm 45 years old. I'm now, identify as poly. I've been through 2 marriages. My determination of a successful relationship is probably different than others.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
if I have a service-oriented relationship, if I say, listen, I'm not going to be in love with you, you're going to come over, you're going to do my laundry, and in exchange, I'm going to beat you, and we do that for 2 years, and they say, I need more, and I say, I don't want more, and that ends, it sounds like a pretty successful relationship. It may not have lasted until death do us part, but it doesn't mean it wasn't successful.
Okay.
I mean, that's the problem. I mean, when we're talking about things like love and all of these kinds of ethereal expressions that don't have a set definition, it all comes down to interpretation. And I've had relationships that have lasted a few months where I have learned so much in terms of personal growth that I would consider those incredibly successful relationships, and in some cases probably more successful than some of my long-term, 5 and 6 year relationships.
I agree. And I was using success sort of in the way that I measure it, and I know that everybody feels differently about what a successful relationship is. I think that, that allotting for change, or, touching base, renegotiating periodically, is a recipe for likely success in the terms of both the people that are involved normally.
I think it's a recipe for successfully navigating things together.
Yeah, and I guess by success I mean being happy, that both people are happy. That's a successful relationship.
I don't know. Some of my relationships made me happy by ending them, so I guess that still counts as success.
Well, and then we get into, what's happy? Okay, we're not going to get into that right now.
Okay, so we're going to have this conversation, but we're not going to define love, we're not going to define success, and we're not going to define happy. Go from there.
We all know what they mean.
Let's back all the way up. Let's not even define relationship.
Okay, how about BDSM?
Mike, and keep going.
We haven't defined what BDSM is, a BDSM relationship. No, everybody's going to have different ideas, and I imagine that I probably interpret the word love differently than some others do.
The other thing I will say, I mean,
blamed
it's really
for that.
Because the problem is that we understand that how we use these words and how other people use these words are different. So we tend to be very, very cautious about how we use them. I made a conscious effort a long time ago to let everybody that I care about know that I love them. I wanted to take some of that baggage out of that word. Like, I will only tell you I love you after we've been together for 3 years and you've met my parents, and then, when I know what it's going to do to you, it's okay for me to tell you that I love you. And I think that there's a little bit of that. It's almost like a weapon. Like, people will hold that word in check for the really important moment or when they've had enough cocktails. And I don't like that as an idea. I really like the idea, because you hear that all the time, right? Do you love me? I really care about you deeply. Well, okay, we're drawing, because I don't want to tell you I love you, because I know that means I'm trapped now forever. but I can say things like, you are important to me, or I care about your feelings, and that's okay. But I can't tell you I love you because then we're together forever, and then it's like, they were saying, it's seen at the aisle kind of moment.
Oh, I agree with you, Shane. I've been bad about that in the past years, and trying to sort of change that about myself. I think the problem sometimes is when you're not confident that you're using that word, that word means the same thing to your partner than it means to you. So if you feel like you can use that word, take the baggage off of it and use it more freely, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're communicating well to the other person, that what you're saying to them is actually what they're hearing. Because they may actually feel like, oh, well, obviously we're together forever now, and we're going to be moving in together soon if we love each other. So I feel like, yeah, using that word is, I would like to be less stingy about that word as I have in the past, but only when I know that my partner sort of understands what I mean when I say that.
I've been a lot less stingy.
Or you can just explain. You can just say, I love you, and here's what that means to me. And I want to know if you love me and what that means to you.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, all these relationships, and BDSM relationships in particular, always require way more reflection than
and
we
you've got a
are
lot of time
sometimes
to talk.
comfortable
So
with.
you got a lot of time to talk, so use
And that's
that.
all you're going to be doing for a long time after that.
Anybody have anything to add about love and BDSM for Valentine's Day? Love's place in BDSM.
Is love consensual?
What's that?
He said, is love consensual?
Sometimes it's not.
Sometimes no. That's the conversation we were having last night, actually.
And I've actually had a relationship where that was a hard limit. Like, it was set up where you need to keep your distance. I've had a couple of those, but one in particular where I was constantly pushing this person away. So I mean, I think it can be a great part, but I think that it needs to be communicated, and I absolutely think that it should and can be consensual, and I think it can be negotiated. And if that's a hard limit for one person and the other person's not happy, they can walk.
Yeah, I don't think you can negotiate the feelings, but I think you can negotiate the parameters.
Well, and I think that you can't require. I can't really answer that. So we've been talking a lot about whether love is necessary for or it fulfills your relationship better if you have love involved. We all have different opinions about that, but I think if I have one takeaway, it's that leaving that organic when you get into your relationship, I think is usually a really good thing to do. Don't say from the beginning that we will fall in love or we won't fall in love, because you got to give yourself that space. It could go either direction. It could stay neutral forever, but you don't know that. And it seems to me like a really good recipe for failure and disaster to start with one of those absolutes.
Yeah, the only thing that I'll add to that, though, is that some people who have opened up their relationships to others have that agreement between each other, or have that stipulation that I'm okay with you playing with other people, or I'm okay with you having a power exchange with another person, as long as you don't fall in love with the person. And so they have to sort of negotiate that, stipulate that at the beginning of the relationship, that if that were to happen, then this would have to end. And I think that's unfortunate. I would never make that, get into an arrangement like that, but some people do feel strongly that protecting the primary or protecting the existing relationship is more important than anything else. So I think, making it clear to the other person that, not that we can't fall in love, because I don't think that you can help that, but if that were to happen, then this has to end. I can see where people would make that, negotiate that in. I just don't really agree with it.
Well, Michael, just to add on that, actually, we kind of do have that arrangement, but not to that extent. Our arrangement is we do protect the primary relationship, for anybody listening that can't see me. We're sharing a tablet, but we are married. And, I'm allowed to have an extra relationship, female relationship, but it's not that if I developed love feelings, the relationship would have to end. It's if that relationship took priority over our primary relationship, we would have to reassess.
Yeah, and I guess we're, however you negotiate it, but negotiating love to some people sounds perfectly reasonable, and to some people sounds utterly absurd. And
Well,
I think
yeah, and I
we
guess that's
probably
what
have a
I was
mix
trying to make is
on
I
this
think it's
panel. We have a mix of people who see it differently.
yeah, but I think for me anyway, it's perfectly reasonable to think that saying I want you to love me 10% less sounds anything but goofy. But I think it's perfectly acceptable for me to say no matter how much you love me, you're going to have to, text me 10% less because it's starting to cost me money. No, but I mean, you can negotiate the limits, and we've talked about this to Marissa's point, where no matter how much I care about somebody, if I've got a responsibility to be involved in another relationship, I can't devote all of my time to something. So that's not a function of how much I love somebody.
We know that the amount that you text somebody is directly correlated to the amount that you love someone.
Totally.
Well, only if you've used the word love.
Wow.
Only if you've used the word love.
All right. Well, we're gonna sew this up. Good points all around, and take a little break here. And well, not really a very long break, but we're gonna try and get into the next little bit. Anybody need a break away from their computer?
Nah, I got people to haul me shit.
All right. Well, let's
I'm
get into the
leveraging
fun
love.
stuff. Let's get into the fun stuff. Now we're going to shift gears and talk about sex in BDSM relationships. And I will start with the same question that I started with the love in BDSM, with just one word change. Is sex an essential component to a fulfilling BDSM relationship?
Well, let's define sex.
Yes. First, let's talk about, well, that's actually one of the other questions, and that is, what do I mean, or what do we mean when we're talking about sex in BDSM?
Well, I would think it's
Josie?
anything sexual in nature. Okay, go, Jenny.
No, I mean that's what I'm saying too. We can talk about penetrative penis in parts sex. We can talk
She
about
couldn't say it. Oh, she
Mammal on mammal.
Which parts, Josie?
freaking gender police are going to track me down to my email and tell me about how not everyone has a penis. Okay, parts sex, sexual activity too. So touching, but I think there's a lot of stuff that has nothing to do with touching that I think Marissa was also saying, sexual activity can encompass a lot. Use your imagination.
Okay.
It's interesting. I'll throw my hat in this particular ring. I think that for me personally, I can have a scene with somebody that is not what I would call overtly sexual, where I am not, putting my hands on them. There's no to use the gender neutral sort of thing. There's no genital contact on either side of it. But I've played with people where I have been fully clothed and done, say, a fire cupping demo with some people where it's actually turned me on. Now, that is not negotiated sexual contact. That is not concerns about fluid, whatever. And it doesn't necessarily happen all the time in the sense of doing like demos and stuff. But I do a lot of play that I do because it turns me on. Now, that doesn't have to manifest itself as sex or sexual activity with the person that I'm playing with. But I wouldn't be doing that if it wasn't enjoyable for me. And for me, there is a sexual component to that activity, right? It is a turn on for me to do these things. But that doesn't mean that I have to, like I said, manifest that sexuality with the person I'm playing with.
Right. I mean, I could stand against a wall and let Shane whip me all day long. I'm not having sex with him, So
But it is kind of sexy.
Yeah, I recommend against it.
Sexual gratification
Both
from
probably.
that.
That's not a sexual scene, So I think if
I disagree. I think that can be a completely sexual scene, and the cool thing about that in this kind of situation is that Shane doesn't have to be involved. I mean, he may be swinging the whip, but if I decide that while that's happening, I want to have an orgasm, I can. If I am feeling sexually gratified, it doesn't necessarily mean that he has to be or that he's going to be.
And that's exactly my point.
About what sex is in BDSM contact. It doesn't have to be two people. I could get sexual gratification without you meaning to give it to me or without you also getting it.
Yeah,
That's
and
true, I
that's
guess.
what I was saying is that me being turned on by play is a function of me enjoying the scene, not necessarily a sense of sexual connection with the person I'm playing with. Right? We may share that enjoyment of what I'm doing. Like, I mean, what I've been doing a lot of lately and really enjoying is a lot of single tail scenes, and some people enjoy it more than others. And there are some scenes where I've gotten into it, and it's been really, really fun and really more of a turn on for me. But that is a turn on for me whether I know for a fact that the person I'm hitting is turned on. It's a completely independent thing.
Okay. It's like getting a boner at the chiropractor, or
Yeah, very, very much a George Costanza, it moved at the masseuse kind of masseur kind of moment.
well, let's back up a little bit and sort of clarify here. I think we're all kind of agreeing that when we say sex, we're talking about sexy stuff. We're talking about things that are sexual or things that, even if it's not, on both sides of a scene or of a relationship, that is sexual gratification, sexual, being turned on. Is that sex important for fulfilling relationships?
No, I don't think it
But
is.
to me, there's a complete difference between something that's sexual and sex. Sex is sexual, but not everything sexual is sex. So,
Yeah, and
those
also,
are two different questions for me. Can it, does the BDSM need sex? For me, no. Does it need to be sexual? And I think everybody was saying this. You're talking about being turned on. It needs to be sexual. I need to, I want to be turned on by it. Really helps to process the pain when I'm turned on by it.
Okay.
well, also, I mean, there are things that are enjoyable to me. I mean, I could enjoy it, but not have any sexual pleasure from it. I don't know. Not everything is a turn on, but it's still enjoyable.
Yeah, I can agree with Marissa. I've done some great scenes where I haven't necessarily felt turned on in a sexual way, but I have felt really, really engaged because, the particular style that I was playing in required focus, and there was just, it's just sort of this immersive sort of moment where I just feel really connected and engaged to what I'm doing, but it's not the same as feeling a sexual component to it. It's really more of an emotionally and mentally engaged kind of thing where I've gotten a lot of fun out of that. But I didn't, go, okay, well, now I've got to have to do something about this. I'll have to walk around with a pitch tent all night.
And I think we can probably all agree, and I'll give you a second here, Brian, but I think we can agree that it's different for everybody. That, whether it's how we define what sex or sexy means, or whether it's necessary for fulfilling BDSM relationship. I'm thinking of rope people. That I observe who take great pleasure, great interest, and find rope scenes very satisfying, that don't appear, and maybe I'm wrong, they don't appear to be turned on. They don't appear to have a sexual interest in this, but it's but making something that's maybe sexually beautiful is pleasing to them. So everybody's kind of gets something different out of it. Brian, go ahead.
So far, everybody's been talking about seeing this and seeing that, and I think those are valid points, but I'm going to throw in the word ongoing. And I'm going to say if I'm going to have an ongoing partnership or an ongoing set of scenes with someone, for me, there should be at least some sort of sexual gratification there. Now, I'm with Shane. If I'm just standing around and I feel like throwing a whip at someone or throwing a flogger, or if I feel like doing some artsy suspension with someone, just for me, sure, I'll do that one time. But in terms of an ongoing dynamic, it feels like some sort of sexual arousal or gratification should be a part of that.
Well, then are you saying that there's nobody in the community that's asexual?
No.
I think he's speaking personally. His preference is that he would like to be sexually engaged.
I'm certainly not setting mandates for the community here, but in my opinion, for me, if I want to throw somebody upside down one time just because I'm feeling in that mood, that's fine. but that doesn't constitute, any sort of ongoing relationship. So I think, if it wasn't specified in the question whether, it's whether a single scene or whether this is a full power exchange dynamic, I think it can be different.
So
I think it also depends on how.
Go ahead,
I was going to
Andrew,
say,
and then Josie.
sorry, I think it depends on the sexual drive of each person in the relationship. I mean, you could look at any relationship, even ones outside of the BDSM scene, and you see all types of failed marriages because of mismatch in sexual drive. Or you could see a very happy marriage with a very low to no sexual drive. Yet it's still a successful marriage, a successful relationship. So, I think that drive and what each partner is wanting to get out of the relationship is what really matters.
Yeah. I love, by the way, listening to you talk while Marissa's avatar shows up on my screen.
I would have had my own tablet, but we figured the echo might be negative to this conversation.
I really like to interject something here. The one thing, and I've had this conversation a lot with people lately, is this whole notion of transposing kink or BDSM on some of this emotional stuff. And we've kind of mentioned it in a couple of small ways, but I don't see it necessarily being any different than how we pursue some of our vanilla interests, right? Like if I get turned on by going and getting a professional massage, does that mean I have to sleep with the person doing it? Like, can I enjoy it at a personal level? Does that mean that I have a sexual relationship with that person? We tend to apply this language to kinky people when we have all of this stuff that happens in a vanilla context, and it seems much easier to sort of deal with, right? In terms of, or people don't even think about it because it's so a part of our nature. Do you know what I mean? Like, I flirt with the coffee girl every day, and I enjoy flirting with the coffee girl every day. Now, I flirt with the coffee girl every day because I go for coffee every day. In the history of my getting coffee, which is extensive and broad, I've only ever slept with one person that I met at a coffee shop, right? So does that mean that, I'm hoping that everything turns into a sexual relationship? No, I just, I like flirting with people, and it's fun, and it makes me happy. But we don't sit there and go, well, if I'm flirting with somebody, does that mean I have to, I'm having a sexual relationship with them, or I have to have a sexual, you know what I mean? It's just, sometimes I think we put too much effort in this. I mean, we navigate our lives fairly well. Like I said, I mean, I play with people where it's like, wow, this is awesome, and I'm totally turned on by this. I've had scenes where I'm kind of like, nah, I'm glad I did it because I knew they were interested in it, and it was, really nothing for me. And I've had scenes where, it kind of fell somewhere in the middle, and in every one of those cases, I went home and slept fine.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about, get personal a little bit with people here on the panel. Take a pass if you don't want to answer, but let's start with Brian. Brian, you had mentioned that you might feel differently when you're talking about an ongoing relationship. I think that's a pretty good distinction because I kind of feel similarly to you, I think. But let's everybody try to answer this question. Is sex an essential component of fulfilling BDSM relationship for you? Brian?
Yes.
Aaron?
Oh, God. Is sex necessary for a BDSM relationship?
A fulfilling BDSM relationship for you?
No.
Okay. Jess, you have an opinion?
Yes. Yes, I have an opinion, and the answer is yes.
Okay. Josie?
Well, I don't think it's essential, but no, I think that it is. is that I can still play with people and have it be rewarding, but I don't think I could engage in that relationship over a period of time and not, because play is fun. It's cool that I can get sexual gratification from it even if you're not involved, but it's definitely a lot better if you do. If we can exchange and I can know that we can share that attraction, or that we can play and we can have super hot sex because we played. I think we're kind of kidding ourselves when most of us are like, oh no, not important. I could totally take a pass.
Well,
I don't think that I would want to too many times in a row.
I've had a long-term relationship where we played regularly, at least once a week, for a couple of years and never had sex. And that is because the goal of the relationship was not sexual. So the relationship is, I would say, is successful and fulfilling because those goals were met, exceeded, but
Would it have been better?
Partner, and there was no like sexting involved, and there was no orgasm control involved in that relationship.
Well, I think the difference, again, when you guys were talking about it, you guys were saying sexual and sex is the same thing, and I'm differentiating. So yes, I was really turned on, but there was no sex with him, and so.
Would it have been better if there was sex with him?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that particular relationship and that particular goal needed that distance between us.
Andrew and Marissa, you have 2 cents to add?
Well, to answer your question, with my primary, Andrew, yes, it's important. If with any secondaries, no, it's not important. So, spoken like a true switch.
I would say that for me, I have a very high sex drive, so yes, it is important.
Okay.
But that's also the kink that I'm into as well.
Okay.
Me?
Yes, you.
It's interesting. I've had some really good, successful long-term relationships that didn't have sex but had a lot of sexual tension. And that sexual tension was going to exist whether I negotiated it or not, because, again, it was sort of self-producing. But I don't know that I necessarily have to, and I don't know if it's something we're dancing around, but I don't know that I have to get off with that person to make it fulfilling. Like I said, I think I've been in relationships where I've hung out with people and been turned on by them, but again, not had to make them the object of that sort of sexual outlet.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm sort of differentiating in the same way that Brian does, in that I can do a scene for demo purposes, or I don't have to feel sexually turned on or connected to the person that I'm playing with. Having a man bottom for me, for instance, is not something sexually interesting to me, but I can and will do if there's other good things that come out of it. But for me to pursue an ongoing relationship, I think there either has to be the tension, the desire, or the possibility of some kind of sex between me and this other person. To have an arrangement, whether it's a power exchange arrangement or a play arrangement, I feel like that person has to,
What if you were getting all the sex you needed from somebody else or other people? Could
I would
you
feel like I was
maintain
a service
that
top.
sex is... Oh.
Yeah, I don't think that matters, because I never see sex as, I have enough so I don't need it. It's more particular to the people that I'm involved with. Like, even if I'm having a lot of sex, that doesn't mean that I have no sex left for you, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. So I pursue relationships and choose partners. It is kind of a sex thing for me. I want to be sexually attracted to the person that I'm involved with on an ongoing basis. If it's just, hey, let's have a scene in the dungeon because it's good, kinky fun, and I might even be a little bit turned on, or I might not, and it doesn't, I can have a good scene and I can be friends or care for this person, but I think that the public's perception of what it is that we do is all about sex. That's why you keep this quiet, because what you do is, it's like being gay. They think that being gay is defined by what you do sexually, as opposed to where your interest and your attractional orientation is. And I think that people view kink the same way. And what's happened, I hear this less and less, but what I've heard, and I'd like to get your feelings about this, that some people will insist that BDSM has nothing to do with sex.
Say that again.
Some people will insist that BDSM has nothing to do with sex. And, you know, I think that's fine if they're speaking for themselves, but often when I hear it, it seems like they're trying to speak for everybody. Like, sex is one thing, BDSM is another. Sometimes they overlap, but they...
No, it's completely sexual. It is sexual. It's
I think
erotic.
it'd be better if they said it's not all about sex.
Yeah.
Maybe a lot of it is, but not all, because they don't want it to sound cheap and dirty. That's why they say stuff like
Like
that.
85%. It's like a good B
Like
plus.
99.
B plus
There's that 1%
percent.
that is totally about respect and other stuff. I think that's what they're saying.
I'm gonna go real low. I'm gonna say 20%.
It's 20% about the sex?
Yes, but it has to be there. It's a critical component. But for me and my personal kink, I'm in it for the power exchange, and that's what makes the kink to me.
Yeah, but Brian, what good is the power exchange if you can't get fucked the way you want?
Exactly. That's the 20%.
Again, sorry. Here's Shane over in the corner going, yeah, the shit you're not supposed to say, that's my job.
Well,
No, we're agreeing, but we're just saying the power exchange
I
is
think that's
sexual
a very
to
fair
us.
question. I think it's a very fair question, and I feel like that is the foundation for my answer of, is sex a critical component? Yes, because if I'm in charge, if I'm top, if I'm dom, I want to be able to use my toy as I see fit. Like that's my kink.
What I find most interesting about sort of people who, you know, wear this as a badge, for one, I think sometimes it sounds like a contradiction, and therefore it makes them sound deep or, you know, enlightened, or that their kink is higher than yours because theirs isn't bogged down by the petty cheapness of sex. And then you see this person playing in the dungeon, and they're all about the half-naked girl tweaking the nipples, you know, spanking the ass, you know, touching all the sexy bits of the person that they're playing with. And oh no, it has nothing to do with sex. And I challenge that. I think that for most people, I'm not saying everybody, I'm not saying that there are completely asexual people who engage in BDSM who have no interest in sex, sexiness, sexual contact, or anything like that. I'm just saying that for most people, it's at least a little bit about sex. Would
Well,
we
I think
agree?
it becomes a semantic issue too, because they say, I'm not in it for the sex, I'm in it for the control, or I'm in it for the power exchange. You tell me that control and that power exchange is not rooted in some sort of sexual gratification.
Well, I think that the reason that vanillas have a problem understanding this is because sex is their ultimate goal. That's what they're going for. And for us, that's not the end game. For us, that's just a component of what we're doing.
That, I think, Aaron, you really hit the nail on the head. Is that, you know, I obviously I don't think any of us, you know, rolled out from under a rock kinky. You know, people will talk about it, but I mean, I've had a lot of relationships that were vanilla before I sort of, you know, discovered that expression of my kinky self. And, you know, you flirt, you talk, you do whatever, you date, you know, for two reasons. One, to develop a relationship, but that relationship in a vanilla context always includes sex. Like, sex is always sort of the prime mover. And my investment in a lot of play has been for different kinds of connections. There may be, again, like a sexual tension there, or a sense of sexuality, but actually at the end of the night, you know, winding up with this girl naked in my bed where I have to, like, throw her out is not really part of the thinking anymore. It is in some cases, but there's a lot more there's a lot more to gain satisfaction from than just the idea of getting my dick wet.
All right, well, we have a comment here that I think relates to what, you know, where we've been going with this. Power exchange can be extremely satisfying without any sexual component. I work with a very alpha supervisor. I do not have any sexual feelings for him, but I greatly enjoy our power exchange. So does he, even if he isn't sure why. So, you know, and what we're talking about, that's not necessarily BDSM. BDSM being in I think most of our ideas something mindful and negotiated, where you would go to supervisor and say, hey, I like it that you have that you're my boss, and I like serving you as your, you know, as your subordinate, and can we play with that and make it cool? That. But I think power exchange, like in everyday life, and these examples that we find in the workplace, in our families, in our platonic friends and so forth, that sometimes there is a little bit of power exchange, a little bit of kink that really doesn't have anything to do with sex. Agree? Don't agree?
See, I still think that when that person is saying, I don't have sexual feelings for him, but I greatly enjoy that power exchange, I am still saying that at least a small part of that enjoyment of the power exchange is a tingly feeling in her bit.
Yeah, I agree. Like that may be well at the office, but I'm having a hard time imagining that there hasn't been one evening spent with a handheld power washer shower setting where that was a fleeting thought through your mind at any given time. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're judging on our own experiences. Maybe.
Well, no. But what I'm saying, and I've said this earlier, is that I don't know that I can. You can easily discount the sex, but I don't know that you can ever discount the sexuality or the sexual tension of it.
I think that it's entirely possible that this person who's commenting does not feel in a sexual way towards this person, but they enjoy that power exchange that they have with the person. I think most of us like power exchange is sexy, and sexy is power exchange. So when we see that, or when we encounter it in the vanilla world, it does give us a little tingle in our bits. But I don't know that we can say that, oh, come on, that there's something sexy there. It may not. I don't think, I'll buy the fact that it could be completely platonic power exchange, but I don't know that I would call it kink or BDSM because it's not a mindful expression. And not only that, it wasn't negotiated, it was set when you were hired. That this person is in charge of you.
Yeah, but I guess that's the difference, right? Is that I work for somebody, right? So in an inherent sense, there's a power exchange. If I have a boss, then I have a standard I have to live up to that's not my own. I don't set my hours, I don't set the job. So there's a professional power exchange that exists, and I think all of us have experienced that, either as a manager, as an employee, whatever it is, right? Someone else makes the rule, we bitch about our bosses bitch about us being lousy employees. Like, that's just the nature of the things, right? But I have never inherently enjoyed those power exchanges. I've accepted them, I understand them, but I don't enjoy them. And so we talk about, in this particular case, it's not power exchange that I hear, it's, I hear extremely satisfying power exchange. Well, I have a very successful power exchange with my boss because we do great work, but it doesn't mean that I enjoy the power exchange. So to me, when I hear enjoyment and power exchange together, that's what superimposes that even fringe sexuality to me. It's not just the fact that I'm experiencing power exchange, because we all experience platonic power exchange in our life every day. When we get on a bus and the driver says, you must sit down, that's power exchange. I don't have the authority to say, no, what, fuck you, I'm going to stand up the whole ride, or I get kicked off the bus, right? We have to live within these rules. There's always power exchange, and we accept it, but I've always found that people who enjoy a particular power exchange are getting something more out of it than, this is just a really successful power exchange.
Yeah, I guess I have a hard time understanding it because I've never sat by and said, I enjoy this power exchange that I have with my superior at work. Like, I get something out of it, this is good, unless, it's hard for me to imagine outside of sex where that would be satisfying.
Right, but that's my point. I've been a manager. I'll look at it from the other way. I've been a manager where I've had a department that reported to me, and I was the rule maker and the rule enforcer. I was the top in that power exchange, and I had no interest in sleeping with any of my employees, but it was still a successful, in terms of we got shit done, power exchange.
Yeah, but it wasn't BDSM.
No, but but my point was it's when you say I have this satisfaction, this happiness, I'm reading between the lines about the implication, and I think Josie did the same thing. It's not that, it's a vanilla power exchange. We're all familiar with those. Whether we, all we have to do is think about our day, and we've been exposed to that. But I don't know that we go home going, well, that was a really satisfying power exchange without having some lizard brain activity going on there.
Okay. I agree. for the most part, any power exchange that's outside of my DS relationship is not enjoyable to me.
Okay. Well, let's go on. I want to know how important you think it is for your ideas about sex and BDSM, or your desire for sex with your BDSM, matches up with your partners. How important is it that they match up?
I think Andrew touched on that a little bit ago when he was talking about, even in the vanilla setting where you see marriages that fail because people's sex drive don't match up. So I think it's really important, regardless of what situation you're talking about, BDSM or vanilla or whatever. I think that having that compatibility is really important, because if I never want sex and Andrew wants it all the time, then one of us is going to be unhappy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, denial is not your kink. It's
No.
But we understand that, and I think outside of that, because obviously orgasm control, orgasm denial is a big part of what a lot of people do, and I think that it's pretty clear that they prefer a mismatch in that case of someone's desire for sex and the other person's, that you have the one person who always wants some kind of gratification or some kind of sex with the other person, and they're constantly getting denied or slapped down, or put in a chastity device or something. That aside, okay, because that's, I think, a very specific kink. I think I can fathom a few situations where not matching up on this issue could be okay, where in an ongoing relationship, if the act, the things that I'm into, and let's say I'm into flogging or whipping or some kind of impact play or something like that, and they get off on it with body-shaking orgasms, and that's like their release, and they think it's the most sexual thing ever, and I don't see it as a sexual thing, but I get other kinds of enjoyment out of it, doesn't that still work well? If they're getting what they want out of it and I'm getting what I want out of it, even if those things don't match up?
I think the difference there is that is exactly what I was going to say, is that you can have, on my side, if I can still get off and you can be like, great, my partner's getting off, that's cool, maybe you don't also want to get off, but that's functional. I think the problem is if you are completely disinterested in me getting off, whether I am or whether I care about it. If you're just like, oh, whatever, you do what you want to do, go in the bathroom when we're done, or go, that disinterest, I think, would make me really not like you. Like, it would just totally kill any boner I had for you. Not because you didn't want to have sex with me, but because you were disinterested in my pleasure at all.
Yeah, Michael, I think what you did was set up a scenario and then said, clearly this is a mismatch. And I would disagree with you under that exact same scenario. I say that is a match. Because if your partner is getting off and you're getting other things out of the relationship, and again, it's a more holistic view of the thing, but you said you were happy with the relationship in other ways, you're getting gratification in other ways, that seems like a match to me.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think
even if it's not simultaneous.
Symbiosis, kind of.
Well, but it's really interesting, and I have this conversation again. If I can put it into a bit of a vanilla context, and maybe I'll take my lumps for this one, but I've been involved, for example, because one of the things that we're talking about a lot is this concept of sexuality or sex as getting off, and I've met a lot of guys who have been with girls who have a difficult time orgasming through sex, for example, but have a great time having sex. So this whole concept of the guy gets off and the girl doesn't, is that a mismatch? I've met a lot of people who are perfectly happy to, get a massage and have their partner, rub one out, and that's perfectly satisfying to them. And I think that's sort of Josie's point, which is if you can find some common ground where your interests in each other in that relationship, in how you connect with the other person on an intimate level, may not be directly related to, okay, our sex organs are out and they are actively engaged in what we are doing at the exact same amount of time for the exact, you know what I mean? I know a lot of people who are perfectly happy, and we see this in a lot of relationships, in the kink relationships, cuck queening and cuckolding, that the sexual gratification for one partner comes in cooking a meal for somebody who's going to go out on a date and fuck somebody else and then come home and tell them about it.
Yeah,
You know?
I agree, but I would make the clarification for me, anyways, that when I say something gets me off or getting somebody off, I'm not necessarily talking about orgasm. I'm
Right,
just talking
I
about
know that, but we're talking about some kind of sexual release, some sort of finality to it. Like, I just had a good sexual time. Right?
yeah. I'm not.
Pleasure.
Huh?
Yeah, I'm not even talking about release or finality. I'm just talking about being turned on in a fun way.
Right, but there are some people who are turned on, but encourage their partners to be turned on, which was Josie's point, which makes that relationship work for them. Right? I see that a lot in poly relationships where people are really happy with each other because they're in a relationship that's an awesome and excellent partnership with someone who's asexual, and that asexual partner is like, man, go out and bang the ass off of somebody because I know that makes you happy. It's not a responsibility that I have to have, and we get to have all that great stuff in our relationship, cuddling on the couch watching a movie. You get what makes you happy, and everyone is happy.
Right, and poly does, I mean, when you add that dimension, as it does for so many of the other topics that we've talked about on the Kink Tank, when you add that dimension, it changes things completely. What I'm talking about is between two people, whether they are a spoke of a hub or a side of a triangle or whatever. That when we're talking about between two people, how important is it that their ideas about sex and BDSM match up with the other person's? And I guess what I'm hearing is not very, as long as it's complementary.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I have learned about kinky relationships, good, successful kinky relationships, is that we can talk about all this stuff, whether we love each other, whether we care about each other, whether we're having sex, whether we're not having sex, how often we're having sex, whether our kinks line up, is that I have found that people who are together monogamously or in poly relationships that are just simply happy together, that the little bits that make up that happy become way less important. That working together to be mutually happy, or collectively happy in that relationship really becomes the prime mover. And if for some cases it's, I don't want to have sex with you, but I'm happy with you having sex with other people. I'm happy because we're together in a monogamous way having sex 4 times a day, and oh my God, it's the most awesome thing ever, and we're going to die happy in each other's arms.
Mm-hmm.
I have found that people who understand themselves in their kink relationships are really about being able to find ways to be happy together.
Okay.
And they're more inclined to compromise. They're all this kind of stuff.
In Andrew's example of the monogamous marriage where the desire for sex or the views on sex don't match up, do we have a different answer then?
In my mind, no. And I'll explain really quickly why. Because my issue in terms of those relationships where that libido has been mismatched is when the person with the low libido holds that person responsible in the sense of saying, well, because I'm not getting off, I don't want you to get off. I've seen some people where they're still monogamous, but the partner with the lower libido is encouraging to go and, go watch porn, right? Like, I understand that this is important to you, and I'm not going to judge you for doing that because I realize it's not something you're getting from me. But what I have found is that when there's a resentment in that lack of commonality, that becomes more of an issue.
Okay. When people look at it,
What's that?
or when the high libido partner feels that it's the low libido partner's duty,
Yeah.
I need satisfying, and so
and it's your job.
It's your job to keep me satisfied.
But then
ahead, Josie.
also emotions quickly become involved. Suddenly there's a sense of rejection, and it's more than just, oh, well, you need to do me this service. It's what's wrong with me, or why won't you, why aren't you interested in interacting with me in that way? So I think that it's much more important that things match up in a vanilla monogamous relationship, because that is, sex is your primary sexual outlet in a vanilla monogamous relationship, and if both partners aren't happy in that aspect, can it be a successful marriage? Well, sure, I suppose it could, so long as there's lots of other good things in place. But I think that it's clearly a mismatch there, just sexually.
And that depends on how important sex is to each of the individuals. If you have a mismatch, and that's a very important thing to someone. But I imagine that is the case in BDSM relationships too. If I view sex as a very important part of my kink and my BDSM, and an ongoing partner of mine views it as not very important, I agree with what Josie said at the beginning of this conversation, and that was, that's fine as long as they understand my and care about my gratification. That they don't have to want sex as much as I do, but they have to understand and be okay with the fact that it's important. It's more important to me, and sort of either respect that or help that along, or other ways of respecting it, I guess, is the only word that I can think of, rather than ignoring it or denying it.
Right, and I think the worst possible scenario of that is that person being indifferent. It's the indifference that's the killer. I don't think that is functional at all for anybody. I think that is a very quick way for this to be a complete no. If you're not matched up, then it's not going to work out. But the more we talk about this, the more I'm circling back around, and I'm thinking that being complimentary in this way is acceptable. But I think it probably takes a lot more work, and I think it's a lot harder, even when you're complimentary, because you have to talk a lot, and you have to moderate your own emotions a lot more. You have to kind of keep convincing yourself. If you're in one of these relationships where the other person's not really interested in you, you have to do a lot of self-talk. Like, it's not personal. He's not interested in sex. That's hard over time. I think that for me, it would be really important for me to be matched up, not just complimentary. I think we need to be matched.
Well, it's kind of like the article that I came across the other day. It was a Christian website that did this article about great sex doesn't need to be, quote, shady, sort of a reference to the movie. And there were, all the great ways that vanilla sex can be satisfying, and it doesn't have to be dirty and kinky like that. And, I posted the article. My comment was, well, yeah, but it's better. And I'm wondering if, I think for me, in this conversation...
Michael, leave the religious people alone. We've been down this road. It didn't work out well.
I just posted on my wall. I wasn't, like, trolling them or,
Okay.
trying to get them engaged. I was, but I felt like, yeah, but it's better. And, as we're talking about this as sex in BDSM, does sex need to be a part of BDSM for it to be fulfilling? Well, no. But it is better. I mean, for me, I feel like I have a much better chance of having a happy, fulfilling, or otherwise desirable relationship with somebody that I'm sexually attracted to, that we match up on the sex, parts of it, and that there is sex in the relationship and sexy stuff, and I'm just happier that way. I imagine that there are people who don't care about these things, but this is just
Can I throw one thing out there, though? I'd like to add, especially as a sort of a follow-up to the previous conversation about love. A lot of the stuff that I've talked about, and from what it sounds like I'm hearing from other people, I think it's a lot easier in the concept of negotiating that. Here's where my sex drive is. Here's where I'm interested. Here's where you're at. Okay, we get along in all these other ways. That works out. It's awesome. I think one of the biggest problems we see is when those things change. And that's what we see to Andrew and Marissa's point about a lot of vanilla relationships or monogamous relationships, is when everybody's sex drive is like, awesome, this is great, and when there's a change and no way to compensate, no way to address that variance or that change. Like I said, I think it's easy for people who have different sex drives to be able to discuss what their interests are, what their, for lack of a better term, their libidos are like, and come to some mutual ground that leads to some really good relationships. I think it becomes harder when you have an understanding or a belief or an expectation of what your sexual involvement in that relationship is going to be, and that changes.
Yeah, it changes, or it's not communicated clearly from the beginning.
Yeah, and you have that all the time where people's libidos drop or change or alter, and they've got a partner who's going, okay, I either want more or I want less, and there's this sort of expectation that everything is going to remain the same, and it's dealing with change, I think, whether it be, like we said, the emotional stuff or the physical stuff and the sexual stuff, as we talk about how relationships, because again, we're talking about, in a scene, you don't have to worry about things changing. The likelihood of things changing over the next hour are probably pretty slim. you know, what we negotiated the scene to look like will probably be what it looks like by the end. But when you're talking
Yes.
about a relationship 3 years down the road or 5 years down the road, and you're going, well, we haven't had sex in a year, we really need to figure something out, that becomes more of an issue, I think.
Yeah,
A
so it's not
year?
the change itself,
Jeez.
it's the ignoring the change, or it's the not being willing to talk about the change that becomes the killer.
Well, to your point, though, Jose, I don't know that that's always the problem, because I've seen a lot of
That is
vanilla
what you just
relationships.
said.
No,
It's
no,
okay
no, no.
for there to be a change, but you have to be able to talk about it.
Right, and that's my point, though, is that in some cases I've seen people who have noticed, talked about whatever this change that's happening, and you had one partner who says, that's too bad, right? We're in this relationship, so you deal the hand that, you know, you play the hand that's dealt you. So it's not a matter of not being able to talk about it, it's not an inability to get past it or to come up with a mutually satisfying solution. So
Okay.
not being able to communicate it is one thing, but not being able to get past it is another.
All right.
I think you two are saying the same thing. I think he's saying the same thing you are, Josie, where
Yeah,
um,
he
it's
just doesn't like it when we do that.
it's
We need to
either an
mansplain
inability
it
or a
for you.
disinterest in closing the gap.
All right. Well, I want to take a moment to thank everybody who came into the panel here, and Jess too, who we lost at the end. She had sent me a text message saying that she was getting some bad coverage or something. But I think that wraps up this episode of Sex's Place in BDSM, and I think it was a very good one. So we're going to end the broadcast here, and then
Thanks for coming out, everybody. It's been great to have like more people. It's been awesome.
yeah, it has been, and
That's cool.
we're going to end the broadcast here, and those who are sort of in the chat room here, we can hang out for another minute after. But thanks for everybody who tuned in. Feel free to comment on the videos. We'd love to hear some feedback about what you heard here. Even if you're not watching it live, go ahead and leave us some comments. We appreciate it. So good night.